I did a video a few months ago about how Eddie Hearn, in my estimation, is under pressure. And I think the pressure is starting to show more and more now. And I don't think the pressure is just coming from his rivals putting on shows at Wembley now, pay-per-views on Sky like Calm Brook, etc. I think the pressure is coming from the top down, from the likes of DAZN, his bosses at DAZN, what's the guy called now? Len Blavatnik, etc. I'd be interested to know whether Eddie Hearn has had a rollicking in some of those board meetings from the likes of Blavatnik and his DAZN bosses, because I imagine he probably has. They're not happy with the way things are going. They want results. Blavatnik had to inject an enormous amount of cash into DAZN to clear its debts, etc. Now, not all of DAZN's issues have been because of Eddie Hearn not delivering on certain things. And he's delivered on a lot of things, of course. He hasn't just failed right the way across the board. He did manage to secure Canelo for another couple fights, which I'm sure they're happy about. But yeah, with DAZN, they failed to acquire BT Sport. And that really was a massive blow for their business, because BT Sport would have meant football and all these other sports, which would have bolstered their brand, which is what DAZN really need in the UK and in other markets as well, like the United States. They need to have other sports on the app, not just boxing, because once they have other sports, the amount of uptake for the app will just go through the roof, particularly if they have something like football in the UK. They've also been trying to work on getting DAZN on, I guess, different platforms, on the Sky platform, whatever accessible on there. I'm not sure if it already is, but I'm assuming it isn't, because Eddie Hearn was asked about trying to get DAZN into pubs, because there are a lot of pub owners in the UK who don't have DAZN. They can't get DAZN, and they want to see if that can be remedied. And Eddie Hearn says they're working on all that at the moment. So yeah, DAZN as a platform is looking a bit shaky at this point. I would like DAZN to work because I like the idea of this Netflix for sport. But the way it's going at the moment, with DAZN introducing pay-per-views, talking about pay-per-views, they're ending up being just the same as all the other platforms. And the uniqueness of DAZN, the main selling point of DAZN, is that you wouldn't have all these pay-per-views. So now you've got a platform which isn't as well known as Sky or even as BT, and the unique selling point seems to be falling by the wayside. So they appear to be in a bit of trouble here, and that means that Eddie Hearn is in a bit of trouble, particularly in the UK market, probably even more so than in the United States. So let's see what happens with Eddie Hearn. But in interviews with Umar, certainly, he's a lot more touchy than he ever used to be. Umar is asking him the same kind of questions that he was asking him 3-4 years ago. 3-4 years ago, Eddie Hearn had a swagger about him where Umar would ask him them kind of questions and Eddie would just laugh and chuckle and say, I have no competition. You can't call Queensbury Frank Warren competition for me. This, that, and it. Now, he still occasionally says these kind of things, but you can tell that he doesn't believe it like he used to. Nowadays, Eddie Hearn realizes that Queensbury and even Sky are actually hot on his heels. And some might argue that Queensbury might actually be overtaking him now in the UK market. Not globally, of course, but in the UK market. I did a poll on my channel asking people whether they think Eddie Hearn has actually lost his grip now on British boxing. And the vast majority of people said yes, he has lost his grip on British boxing. There were some people in the comments talking about Eddie's got Canelo and he's got... Yeah, I said British boxing. Canelo is not British. Yeah, I'm talking about the British market, the UK market. You look at the UK market, try and tell me why Eddie Hearn is dominating the UK market. He's not, as far as I can see. BT, Sky, they're coming back, and the quality of fighters that certainly BT have in terms of British fighters is, some could argue, higher than the quality of fighters that Eddie Hearn has at this stage. Which British fighters does Eddie Hearn have now? He's got AJ, who's been beat. Dylan White just got knocked out by a Frank Warren fighter. Who does he have in the UK? Liam Smith, Callum Smith, Joshua Buatsi, Lawrence Okoli. Lawrence Okoli's a good fighter. I don't think Frank Warren has anyone. I know he doesn't have anyone in the cruiserweight division that's as good as Lawrence Okoli. So that's a good fighter there for Eddie Hearn. A light heavyweight, yeah, Buatsi you could say might be better than Callum Johnson, might be better than Anthony Yard. He might be. But he hasn't got in the ring there and fought those fighters yet to prove it. Apparently, they offered Yard £1 million to fight Buatsi, which Yard turned down. Separate story. But still, these guys are comparable, right? These guys are at least a similar level to Joshua Buatsi. I'm talking about the Callum Johnsons and the Anthony Yards potentially. And if they're not on the same level as Joshua Buatsi in terms of ability, they're on a similar level in terms of commercial value. Certainly Anthony Yard is. At middleweight, who's Eddie Hearn got in the UK? I can't even think off the top of my head what middleweights Eddie Hearn has in the UK. Light middleweight, again, he's got Liam Smith. Welterweight, he's got Conor Benn. I guess Frank Warren doesn't really have any welterweights other than Avanesian, right? That Esserman guy, yeah, he's got him, but I mean, yeah, Esserman is not beating Conor Benn. Based upon what I've seen of Esserman, he gets absolutely smoked by Conor Benn. So I understand why Esserman is pursuing the Conor Benn fight and why his team are pursuing the Conor Benn fight, because Esserman's in his 30s. And again, judging by the way he looks, yeah, he's not going anywhere fast. Therefore, it makes sense they would try and pursue the Conor Benn fight because it's a big payday, right, for them. So in the UK right now, Eddie Hearn is pinning a lot of his hopes on Conor Benn. That seems to be the main guy who is putting his money behind and his hopes behind. And a commercial push behind is Conor Benn. He's obviously lost a lot of faith in AJ. Dylan White is a free agent, as he always has been. He works with Eddie Hearn on a fight-by-fight basis, and Dylan White's commercial value is never going to be anywhere close to what it used to be. So it's not looking good. Let's be real. On the domestic front for Eddie Hearn, it's not looking good right now. His rivals, if they haven't surpassed him yet, they're very close to doing so. Is it a case of Eddie Hearn spreading himself too thin? Because he's, according to him, the only global promoter? Will that come back to bite him in the butt? The fact that he's trying to spread himself too thin and be a jack of all trades, master of none? Would it be better to just concentrate on a couple of territories and forget about all these other territories? Now, the interest of DAZN is to have all these territories covered because they're a global brand, right? But in terms of Eddie Hearn's business, that might not be the best thing. But of course, ultimately, DAZN don't really care about Eddie Hearn's business. Eddie Hearn is just a tool for them. He's a means to an end. If the process of turning DAZN into this global brand, which has established itself in pretty much every country around the world, if in that process it destroys Eddie Hearn's business, obviously they're not going to care about that because promoters can be easily replaced. The same attitude that promoters have towards fighters, broadcasters often have towards promoters. Well, if your business is destroyed in this process of us going global, well, we just replace you with somebody else. It's not a big deal. This is how promoters think about fighters typically, and this is how broadcasters often think about promoters. Not always, but often. Sky, for example, were desperate to keep hold of Eddie Hearn. They didn't want Eddie to go. And by the way, this is one thing I should address before I end this video. There are a lot of people out there, I've seen them, and these people are either people that are incapable of being objective, or they're just not very intelligent, or they're casuals, right? But there are people out there saying that Eddie Hearn is losing his grip on British boxing only because he moved over to DAZN and he was never a talented promoter in the first place. It was only Sky's platform and Sky's power that allowed Eddie Hearn to become successful. This is complete and utter rubbish. And anyone who says that, again, fits into one of the categories that I just listed. Eddie Hearn is a very talented promoter. when he first came onto the scene, he started doing things that Frank Warren wasn't doing. And this is what enabled him to make the most out of his position on that Sky platform as their exclusive promoter. He started using social media. Frank Warren wasn't using social media. Frank Warren didn't understand the younger generation. He was actually taking the mick out of Eddie Hearn for using Twitter and other social media initially. Now, Frank Warren doesn't use Twitter now, but he has a Twitter account run by somebody else who tweets for him. Eddie Hearn was on Twitter all the time, and it's not someone else, but it's Eddie Hearn himself. I'm not sure if it's still the same now, but certainly for several years, it was Eddie Hearn himself on Twitter. He made himself accessible to fans, not just on social media, but even at Eddie Hearn's events. You could just turn up at an Eddie Hearn event with your smartphone and get an interview with him. You couldn't do that with Frank Warren. Frank Warren and the old school promoters made themselves very exclusive, and they put a huge barrier between themselves and the public. You couldn't just talk to Warren. It wasn't accessible like that. And also, if you criticized Warren, many people got banned from Warren's press events and, public events, etc., in terms of getting access to him and in terms of getting access to the event. Whereas with Eddie Hearn, people criticize him and he'd still let him in. Now, it's not out of the goodness of his heart, of course, but it's because Eddie Hearn believed that no publicity is bad publicity. So if he lets in a bunch of YouTubers who don't like him, they're at least going to be talking about him. They're at least going to be posting interviews with him all over the internet. Eddie Hearn was an absolute, let me rephrase it. Eddie Hearn was probably the most watched promoter in boxing history for a few years when he was doing all these interviews. Maybe he still is, but some of the other promoters have caught up a little bit in terms of doing interviews. They still don't do as many as Eddie Hearn, but Frank Warren does a lot more, of course, than he used to. Bob Arum, all these other guys. But Eddie Hearn really pioneered that in terms of boxing promoters, appearing on social media, doing interviews for all these random YouTube channels, etc. And this was very, very important and very, very impactful in terms of promoting his events. Now, it's one thing to just get interviewed by loads of different people on social media and interact with people on Twitter and all this kind of stuff. But it's another thing to actually be good at doing that, to be a charismatic person. Eddie Hearn is charismatic. And people are going to be saying, some idiots are going to be saying, what's this got to do with boxing promotion? Boxing promotion is sales. You're a salesman. If you don't understand how being charismatic relates to being a salesman, then, I don't know what to tell you. Right? You want your salesmen, anyone who's in sales, right? Anyone who has a company or you're selling anything, you want your salespeople to be charismatic. You want them to be likable. You want them to be able to charm the customers. That's what Eddie Hearn does. Okay, he's a fantastic salesman. Even this fight that's coming up on the weekend in New York, he's managed to bamboozle a bunch of people into thinking that this fight is the be-all and end-all, when it's not. When I've posted pictures, other people have posted pictures from the Ticketmaster website, which shows you that there's loads of tickets still available for that fight. Loads. And they're extremely cheap. I'm talking about York Hall prices. And Eddie Hearn's trying to make out as though this is some historic event for the ages. Really? When you've spent this much money on promoting a fight and the tickets are that cheap, you should have sold out 3 times over. But yet we're a day before the fight now. And there's loads of tickets still available, even though they're unbelievably cheap. Okay? This is the power of Eddie Hearn. He has the charisma and the ability as a salesman to sell ice to Eskimos and sand to Arabs. So this whole notion that, he was only successful because he had the Sky platform, absolute nonsense. Eddie Hearn is a talented promoter, i.e. a talented salesman. Very good at that. Much better salesman than Frank Warren. Frank Warren might be a good at doing business deals and all this kind of stuff behind the scenes. But when it comes to selling his events and selling himself and selling his brand, Eddie Hearn is leagues above Frank Warren. Frank Warren is lucky, shrewd, yes, in signing him, but fortunate to have a salesman like Tyson Fury as one of his fighters. Because if he didn't have a salesman like Tyson Fury, he wouldn't have been able to catch up to Eddie Hearn in the domestic market. Because Frank Warren is not the kind of salesman that Eddie Hearn is. The problem that Eddie Hearn has at this stage, yes, the DAZN move has turned out to not be as good as it might have been. If DAZN had been able to acquire BT Sport, it would have looked a lot better, right? But they haven't been able to do that, so it's looking a bit shaky in that regard. And also, the product that Eddie Hearn is selling, certainly in the UK, as well as he tries to sell it, it's becoming evident now to the public that it's inferior to the product that his rivals are selling in certain instances. So with regards to Anthony Joshua, the public are looking at AJ and they're saying this product is not as good as Tyson Fury. You see it? So Eddie Hearn has some issues in that regard. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Eddie Hearn having issues now domestically in the UK. Will those issues then spread out to the rest of Eddie Hearn's business operation in the United States, other parts of the world? What do you guys think? Let me know.